They buried the report in a locked drawer under the floorboards of Brighton Asylum, sealed in wax and marked, "Do not open, even in death." It was the only file that Dr. Langston Wexler ever refused to discuss in his lifetime. The reason? Elias Wrenmore was never supposed to exist. Before we pull back the veil, subscribe to DeadScroll and like this video. Once you see what Elias became, you'll understand why no one speaks his name in Brighton to this day. This is not folklore. It is not myth. This is a documented anomaly in the history of human behavior. A case so disturbing, so biologically precise in its horror, that every institution involved quietly erased their involvement. But fragments survived, and we found them. In the summer of 1873, Elias Wrenmore was admitted to Brighton Asylum in upstate Pennsylvania under a pseudonym, Edward Walker, age 11. He was not 11. He was not named Edward. The child who arrived that night under torchlight was a boy no one could explain, not even those who claimed to be his parents. He walked without rhythm. He blinked only when watched. And when asked his name, he responded with a question of his own. "What is yours today?" At first, the staff believed he was in a fugue state, dissociative amnesia, perhaps brought on by trauma. But Dr. Wexler noted something chilling in his initial report. Elias answered complex moral questions without hesitation, without emotion, and without error. When shown images of surgical procedures, he did not flinch. When asked about death, he recited the stages of decay. But when shown a picture of a smiling mother holding a child, he blinked, slowly, and asked, "Why does she pretend?" From the very beginning, it was not that Elias Wrenmore lacked emotion. It was that he studied it, as though it were foreign, as though it were mimicry. What followed in the next 29 days inside Brighton would lead to 6 resignations, 2 suicides, and a closed inquiry buried by the Pennsylvania Board of Mental Health. Elias did not simply unsettle the staff. He began to change them. And it starts here. By the 3rd night, nurses began refusing to do overnight watch on Ward 9. It wasn't the boy's behavior. That's what made it worse. He was silent. Still. Obedient. He didn't scream. He didn't fight. He didn't speak unless spoken to. But they said he stared. Not at people, through them. Like he was observing something behind your eyes. Like he was waiting for something to slip. Nurse Holloway was the first to request reassignment. In her written statement, which she later tried to retract, she claimed the boy never slept. That every time she entered the observation hall, his eyes were already open. Not resting. Not daydreaming. Watching. Inhumanly still. Like a painting that breathes, she wrote. Except it knows you're watching it too. Dr. Langston Wexler, by then a tenured physician with a reputation for rationality, ordered around-the-clock observation and began conducting direct interviews. But even he admitted something was wrong by the 5th day. Not with the boy, but with the staff. 3 orderlies reported sudden migraines after interacting with Elias. One experienced bleeding from the ears. Another, with no prior history of epilepsy, collapsed into a full seizure after helping restrain the boy for a routine medical check. Elias didn't resist. He simply touched the orderly's wrist, looked into his eyes, and whispered something no one else heard. The orderly would not speak for the rest of the week. By day 7, Elias was no longer the subject of observation. He had become the observer. Dr. Wexler wrote, "I cannot say with clinical certainty what I am dealing with. He does not meet criteria for any known disorder. What I see in Elias is a presence. Something that calculates without emotion, measures without conscience." The asylum's senior staff began calling for his transfer. But the board declined. Word had begun to spread behind closed doors that Elias Wrenmore might be a genetic anomaly. A child with a brain evolved beyond empathy, beyond instinct. Some whispered beyond human. But those whispers weren't coming from fringe doctors. They were coming from the Philadelphia Neurological Society, the very men who funded Brighton. And one of them wanted to meet Elias himself. They called him Dr. Reinhard Malgrave. The man who believed empathy was a flaw, and Elias Wrenmore was proof. Dr. Reinhard Malgrave did not enter through the front doors of Brighton. He arrived at night, unannounced, in a black carriage with covered windows. No records were signed. No staff were informed. Only Wexler received him, and only Wexler was allowed into the room when the door finally shut behind them. What happened over the next 42 minutes was never transcribed. But Wexler's personal journal, found decades later in a false wall behind his former office, contained a single entry for that night. I have just watched a man with 4 decades of scientific accomplishment wither, not tremble, not recoil, but decay from within, his arrogance stripped away like meat from bone. Elias did not speak to him. Elias studied him, and Malgrave left without his cane. The next morning, Dr. Malgrave returned to Philadelphia. 1 week later, he resigned from all boards, closed his private practice, and was never heard from again. His home was sold, his belongings liquidated, and in a handwritten note to the Neurological Society, he wrote just 4 words. He is not alone. Wexler doubled the staff rotation around Elias. But the boy never attempted to leave. He never tried to escape. In fact, he seemed amused by the fear. The more precautions they took, the more still he became, like a predator watching prey spiral in its own fear. It was around this time that the dreams began. Multiple staff members reported vivid, identical nightmares. In each, they described a corridor, impossibly long, lined with black doors. Behind each door, something whispered in a language they could almost understand. The end of the corridor always ended at a mirror. In the mirror, they did not see themselves. They saw Elias, only older and smiling. Dr. Wexler, a man known for his firm rejection of superstition, began drawing connections between the staff's mental deterioration and their proximity to Elias. He began measuring their speech patterns, noting their handwriting changes, recording their vocal tones. And that's when he discovered the first change. Nurse Holloway's blood pressure had dropped to lethal levels, but she was still conscious, still functional. Her response time slowed. Her voice dropped half an octave. She did not blink when Elias was mentioned. She had become altered, and she was only the first. Wexler initiated covert testing. Blood samples, reflex exams, retinal scans, not on Elias but on the staff. What he found defied every known metric of human physiology. Several nurses and orderlies who had spent prolonged time near the boy exhibited anomalies. Lowered core temperatures, altered hormone balances, and in one case, complete absence of cortisol. No fear response. No stress indicators. Nothing. They were becoming like him. The deeper Wexler looked, the more horrifying the pattern became. Every subject showed neurological drift, a shift in the limbic system, specifically in regions responsible for empathy and emotional regulation. It was as though Elias emitted something. Not a disease, not a contagion, but an invitation. A biological reprogramming. Not forced, chosen. By the end of the second week, Elias had spoken only 9 full sentences. Each one was recorded, dissected, and analyzed by Wexler. But none were more chilling than the one he whispered to Nurse Denning after she brought him his morning tray. "You don't have to pretend anymore." She didn't respond. But later that night, she returned to the ward after hours. Without permission, and without shoes. She simply stood outside his room for hours, smiling, not speaking, just watching. Wexler confronted her the next morning. She didn't deny it. But when asked why she did it, her answer was simple. "He told me the truth." The implications became clear. Elias wasn't just an anomaly. He was a catalyst. And something inside him, or around him, was drawing others into his pattern. Quietly, systematically, one by one. Wexler knew the risk of exposure. The board would never believe him. And worse, if they did, they would take Elias and disappear him into some private facility. So Wexler made a choice. He sealed the East Wing. He forged medical records. And he declared Ward 9 under quarantine due to a neurological contagion of unknown origin. It bought him time, but not much. Because within 3 days, the patients in nearby wards began exhibiting symptoms too. This was no longer containment. This was conversion. And Elias never stopped smiling. Wexler began sleeping in his office. He stopped eating with the other doctors. His notes became fragmented, increasingly paranoid, filled with hand-drawn symbols and obsessive cross-references to ancient texts, pseudoscience, even folklore. In one entry, scrawled in red pencil, he wrote, "He is not a boy. He is a mirror, a polished door between what we know and what knows us." Ward 9 became silent. Those still stationed there, what remained of them, ceased reporting. They did their shifts. They didn't speak. They didn't blink often. One nurse was seen stroking the walls. Another simply stood outside Elias's door for an entire night, eyes wide open, unblinking, her lips silently mouthing something. It was only then that Wexler realized the horror wasn't what Elias did. It was what he revealed. Every human mind has its cracks, tiny fault lines buried under reason, decorum, and structure. Elias didn't need to break anyone. He only needed to show them what they already were, underneath the mask. The truth was corrosive. On August 18th, Wexler made one final, desperate move. He contacted an outside scholar, someone he'd met years ago at a conference in Prague. Professor Aldrich Vaughan specializes in pre-Abrahamic belief systems, anomalous cognition, and ancient psychiatric phenomena. Vaughan agreed to come. When he arrived, he wasn't shocked. He didn't ask for medical records. He didn't want blood samples. He simply asked to see the boy. When Wexler hesitated, Vaughan placed a cold hand on his shoulder and said, "You've seen it too, haven't you? The door in the dream. The voice behind it." Vaughan spent 19 minutes alone with Elias. When he emerged, he was shaking, not in fear but awe. He didn't speak for nearly a minute. Then he looked at Wexler and said, "This isn't science. This is echo. He is the return of something we silenced long ago. He's not just a mirror. He's the first crack." Wexler asked him what to do. Vaughan's answer was a whisper. "Burn the ward." But Elias was already gone. And in his place, scrawled across the walls in ash, was a single sentence. "I never needed the door open. I was already inside." The fire was set at 3:12 a.m. Wexler used kerosene and lit it from four corners of Ward 9. There were no alarms, no sprinklers, no screams. The others, what they had become, simply watched the flames rise as if they had expected it, welcomed it. And Elias? No one had seen him leave. No doors were opened. No windows broken. Yet he was no longer inside. All they found in his bed was the scorched outline of a human figure, still warm to the touch, as if something had melted into the fabric of the world itself and vanished. The next morning, the official report claimed an electrical failure caused the blaze. The ward was sealed off permanently. But Wexler's personal notes, recovered years later, tell a different story. He wrote, "We did not kill it. We merely released it into something larger, into the corridors of thought, the echo chambers of belief. We burned the room, but not the idea." For weeks, staff from other parts of the facility began resigning, not from fear, but from obsession. Several took their own lives in bizarre rituals, surrounded by hand-drawn symbols, burned feathers, or shattered mirrors. Each left behind notes that echoed Elias's voice. "He sees through us. He was always here. We were never alone." And yet none of these incidents made the papers. Briarton Sanitarium continued operating. The truth was locked away, forgotten, until 1946, when renovations began. Construction crews uncovered a sealed wing with scorched floors and walls still etched with strange markings. The smell of smoke still lingered. But what disturbed them most was a perfectly preserved wooden door, unburned, untouched by time, standing alone in a hallway where no room had ever existed on the original blueprints. It was bolted shut from the inside. When forced open, the room behind it was empty, except for one thing: a child's drawing pinned to the wall with a rusty nail. Stick figures, hundreds of them, all with black, hollow eyes. And at the center, larger than the rest, a figure with a crown of thorns drawn in charcoal. Beneath it, in a child's scrawl, "I remember you." The door was resealed the same day. The workers were paid extra to forget. And they did. Mostly. All but one. A man named Bram Keller, a mason with no known history of mental illness. 3 days after the discovery, he walked into a police station barefoot, covered in charcoal dust, and whispered to the desk sergeant, "The boy's not inside. He's underneath." Then he collapsed, dead before hitting the floor. Cause of death: complete cardiac cessation. No drugs, No trauma, just a heart that refused to beat one more time. It wasn't long before rumors began to surface. Among orderlies, among nurses who had worked at Brighton for decades. They spoke in hushed tones about the boy, though no one used his name. They remembered the wing that burned, the people who changed, the way light behaved differently in that corridor. One janitor even claimed shadows in that wing moved before the body did. The board of directors, fearing legal fallout or public hysteria, erased all records tied to Ward 9. Files shredded, tapes destroyed, witnesses paid off or transferred. But of course, like all things buried improperly, the truth festered. In 1963, a group of psychiatric interns stumbled upon a reference to Elias Wrenmore in a mislabeled archive box. Just a name, a photo, a chart without a date. But it was enough. They began digging. What they found were fragments, scorched notes, burned pages, audio files too damaged to decipher. But the pieces formed a pattern. Elias wasn't simply ill. He wasn't just strange. He was something else. Something the institution tried to seal away not because they didn't understand him, but because they did. And perhaps more terrifying, he understood them first. Halfway through their research, the interns began experiencing symptoms. Sleepwalking, nosebleeds, a shared dream about a windowless room. One student, Martha Jeno, disappeared entirely. Her apartment door locked from the inside. The only clue left behind was a single phrase carved into the wall above her bed. He spoke to me. This is where we ask you, viewer, if you're still watching, still with us on this descent, to type "he spoke to me" in the comments. Twice. Not just once. Twice. Let's see who among you hears the voice. By the fall of 1964. The case had unofficially reopened. A single surviving audio reel, warped, brittle, scorched at the edges, was recovered from a condemned records room deep beneath Brighton. The university transferred it to Dr. Marinkel, a linguist specializing in prelinguistic vocalizations and trauma-induced speech phenomena. She'd worked on decoding Cold War distress tapes and ancient chants pulled from submerged ruins in Anatolia. But even she wasn't ready for this. The reel played for 41 seconds. The audio? A child's voice. But not normal. Not humanly possible. It layered upon itself. 12 or 13 registers speaking simultaneously, not in English or any known tongue, but in something felt, not heard. As if the sound bypassed the ears and buried itself in the chest. Her lab assistant vomited. Her dog barked at the empty doorway for 3 days. Dr. Marinkel never released the transcript she claimed to have decoded. But shortly before resigning from the university and vanishing into seclusion, she sent a handwritten letter to her colleague. The letter simply read, "It's not language. It's permission. And we just gave it." That same winter, an underground flood forced demolition of the Brighton sublevel. The sealed wing collapsed in on itself, and with it whatever doors remained. But not the memory. See, Elias Wrenmore had vanished. But he left behind something more enduring than his presence, his pattern. Years later, in institutions across the country, children began to emerge bearing familiar symptoms. Not identical, just close enough to echo. Some drew rooms with no exits. Others repeated sentences they had no way of knowing. One girl in Pennsylvania insisted her imaginary friend wore a black crown. A boy in Montana screamed when shown a photo of Elias. A photo never made public. What spread wasn't a virus. It was a shape, a psychological contour so precise it could mold the human mind like wet clay. It whispered not in words, but in architecture, dreams, silence. And what makes it worse? The pattern adapts. It learns from each encounter. It waits. In 1972, a man named Grayson Vell published a thesis titled Sympathetic Intelligence and the Contagion of Thought. It was obscure, rejected by every major academic journal. But in the footnotes, buried beneath a stack of unread citations, was a reference that caught the attention of one retired psychiatrist. E. Wrenmore, Case File 9, Brighton, 1873. The psychiatrist Dr. Kellen Frey had once been stationed at Brighton in the 1940s. He knew the name, and when he saw it again, decades later, something old inside him twisted, a memory he had buried. So he contacted Grace and Vel. But before a meeting could take place, Vel was found dead in his office. Apparent suicide. The out part? All 314 pages of his thesis were shredded and burned, except the footnotes. The single section referencing Elias remained intact, neatly placed on his desk as if meant to be found. Dr. Frey returned to Briarton's ruins alone. He documented his findings in a single recorded session. He said this: "There was no child in that bed. No bones. No blood. Just a cavity. A vacuum. I've spent 40 years trying to forget the way the air moved around his name." His final words on the tape were barely audible, whispered in a rasping voice. He is not a boy. He is an idea, and ideas do not die. Frey vanished 2 weeks later. Police found his apartment stripped of all furniture, walls covered in handwritten script. Not in ink, but in ash. When the letters were deciphered, they formed a singular phrase over and over again. Return is not arrival. But by the time the phrase appeared in news coverage, similar writings had already been reported in psychiatric facilities across Europe, even in prisons and orphanages. Always the same shapes, the same messages. It was as if Elias Wrenmore had become portable. Not in body, in blueprint, his traits, his pattern, his echo. Wherever trauma lived, wherever minds cracked, he could filter through like smoke through stone. And the terrifying part? It no longer required him to exist. By the early 1980s, a team of independent researchers attempted what the institutions never dared. They sought to map Elias Wrenmore's behavioral imprint. Funded in secret by a former intelligence operative, the project was called Owl Mirror, named for a phrase repeatedly found in psychiatric transcripts associated with Elias's legend. The owl mirrors him. They assembled data from 19 countries, 70 institutions, and more than 300 patients who exhibited symptoms eerily aligned with what little remained of the Wrenmore file. Nonlinear language development, empathy anomalies, severe photophobia, and an obsession with geometry, especially circular or spiral forms. Some of these patients had never heard of Elias, and yet they drew his face. A face never published. A face only one surviving photo ever captured. A photo thought lost in the Briarton fire. But Owl Mirror had it. Water-stained, blurred, but unmistakably real. The most disturbing part? Several children depicted Elias with accuracy, though they were born decades later, on other continents, and had no access to the photograph. Owl Mirror pushed further, running spectral linguistics on reported speech patterns. They discovered a recurring vocal cadence, not words, but frequency structures that mirrored ancient Sumerian summoning rituals. It wasn't speech. It was an invitation, and someone, or something, had accepted. In one experiment, a test subject was exposed to a reconstructed version of Elias's last known vocalization. Within minutes, she entered a trance, scrawled an exact architectural diagram of Ward 9, and then, using her own blood, traced an inverted window on the mirror in her cell. She died 7 minutes later, not from trauma, from sudden cerebral inactivity. Brainwaves? Zero. Like her mind had vacated her body. And that's the thing. The fear surrounding Elias Wrenmore isn't rooted in violence or possession. It's rooted in the possibility that he represents something even more insidious, a mimetic intruder. An idea so potent it doesn't need to harm you. It only needs to be understood. And once you've allowed the thought to settle, you're no longer alone inside your mind. By 1991, Owl Mirror was officially dismantled. Or at least, that's what the public record claims. But deep within a declassified Department of Defense memo, redacted, fragmented, but authentic, there's reference to a pattern interference event during an off-the-books experiment in a subterranean lab outside of Falkridge, Vermont. The report was never meant to be read outside the agency, but a leak surfaced, just one paragraph. Subject 12 displayed symptoms consistent with case Wrenmore. After exposure to stimulus array, subject ceased identifying as human, referred to itself only as a vessel. Room temperature dropped by 7 degrees. All reflective surfaces began to vibrate. Termination authorized. That's all. No names. No aftermath. No explanation. But researchers who'd once been attached to Owl Mirror began disappearing. One by one. Some in accidents. Some by suicide. One man, Dr. Harold Rentz, walked into the ocean and never returned. His note was simple. I heard the boy speak. He was asking to be remembered. By the time journalists caught wind, every trace of the Elias case had been scrubbed from public archives. Briarton's blueprints were destroyed. The original reel went missing. And every living witness either recanted or disappeared. But despite all efforts, the story wouldn't stay buried. Because there were whispers. In underground forums. In dark web threads. In art. In fiction. Even children's drawings sent anonymously to historians and former Owl Mirror operatives. They always included one image. A tall, thin boy, standing in a hallway that shouldn't exist. No eyes. And in his hand, a mirror. Not held toward himself, but toward the viewer. That's the genius of Elias Wrenmore. He doesn't ask you to look at him. He asks you to see yourself differently, to question the structure of your own perception. And once you do, once the seed is planted, the rest is inevitable. Ideas, after all, are patient. They don't decay. They wait. Midway through now, if you're still with us, comment the phrase, "The boy holds the mirror," to show you haven't looked away. Comment it again, and remember, not everyone who sees the reflection survives it. One of the last surviving investigators to publicly speak on the Elias Wrenmore case was a linguist named Dr. Judith Sauro. She had spent 30 years analyzing unstructured speech patterns in children diagnosed with dissociative disorders across the northeastern United States. She wasn't looking for Elias, but he found her. In 1995, she received a package. No return address. Inside were 16 cassette tapes labeled only by Roman numerals and one photo. Burned at the corners, but unmistakable. Elias, standing behind a window. But the window showed no glass. Only darkness. She listened to the first tape. It was static at first. Then faint humming. Then the sound of paper being torn. Then a child's voice. No accent. No regional markers. Reciting what sounded like scripture. Except none of the words existed in any known language. But when Sauro ran the sounds through phonetic regression software, the syllables matched rare utterances from glossolalia trance states documented in ancient religious rituals. In simpler terms, the child was speaking in tongues. But it wasn't random. It had structure. And then came a phrase that stopped Dr. Sauro's research cold. The voice said, "The boy behind the mirror is not waiting. He's listening." She immediately burned the tapes. But something followed her after that. She began seeing reflections that didn't match her movements. Hearing her name whispered when alone. Her research notes rearranged themselves overnight. And her dreams, always the same. A hallway lined with closed doors, all identical, except one. The one without a doorknob. When she finally opened her mouth to warn the public in a 1997 radio interview, the audio was mysteriously cut mid-broadcast. The station claimed a power anomaly. She never spoke again. 2 months later, Dr. Sauro was institutionalized. Her diagnosis? Voluntary cognitive withdrawal, meaning she no longer believed in objective reality. All she would repeat, over and over again, was one sentence. You never see him first. He sees you remembering him. So now the question isn't, who was Elias Wrenmore? The question is, what activated him? Was it trauma? Was it architecture? Was it you? In the sealed case notes of Briarton Asylum, one file remained misfiled for over a century. It wasn't labeled under Elias's name. It carried no date. It was found tucked behind a loose panel in what used to be Ward 9, his ward. Inside was a single-page document titled Only Instructions for Containment. Written in faded ink, it detailed a set of rituals. Not clinical procedures, not medical treatments, but archaic containment protocols. It read more like a medieval grimoire than a psychiatric report. The instructions included: never speak his name in a room with mirrors. Never address him directly after sundown. Always place the patient near moving water, but never let him touch it. If he begins humming, cover your ears immediately. If he draws a circle, Do not enter it. One chilling line stood out, underlined twice. He is not possessed. He is possessing us. This suggests Elias wasn't host to something dark. He was the origin. Not an infected victim, but a transmitter. A signal. A carrier wave of something that could only exist once perceived by others. Modern psychology calls this a cognitive virus, a concept that behaves like malware inside the human mind. And Elias? He was patient zero. The document ended abruptly. No signature, no diagnosis, but scrawled in the margins, possibly by someone terrified, was this note. He's learning how to move without being seen. Next, he'll learn how to stay when no one is looking. 1 month after this note was believed to be written, the Briarton Asylum suffered its catastrophic fire. No origin point for the blaze was ever found. But witnesses reported something horrifying. The fire alarms didn't go off. Instead, every mirror in the building shattered simultaneously. No heat sensors were triggered. No wiring fault ever found. Just glass, breaking, as if pushed outward. And in the ashes, nothing of Elias remained. No bones, no teeth, not even his room. Just a melted silver shard from the back of a hand mirror, inscribed with a single word. Remember. And that, perhaps, is the most dangerous part of his story. He doesn't want to be feared. He wants to be recalled that in 2003, a privately funded research collective known only as the Penumbra Group published a limited distribution white paper titled Ontological Contagion and the Mirror Child Hypothesis. Only 13 copies were ever printed. Most were seized, but one was scanned and leaked online for less than an hour before vanishing. The paper's premise? That Elias Wrenmore is not a person. He is a perception-based anomaly that replicates through memory. It claimed that when a certain configuration of belief, trauma, and symbolic exposure align, especially in children, something awakens. Not biologically, but structurally in the psyche. And Elias? He was the first to survive full activation. According to the Penumbra Group, the human brain is like an antenna, and under the right conditions, it doesn't just receive thought. It broadcasts. Elias's drawings, his mirror fixation, his unnatural silence, they weren't symptoms. They were deliberate mechanisms for encoding a signal. One designed to spread through image, speech, and reflection. The white paper noted recurring reports of identical children appearing in dreams, in rural folklore, and even in medieval religious texts describing the silent saints, thin, pale boys who arrived during plagues and stood at the edges of towns, never speaking, only watching. Every account ends with catastrophe. It proposed a chilling theory. Elias Wrenmore is not confined by time. He is an archetypal signal, a mythic virus, bound to spread the moment he is remembered. And we've done it. We've remembered him. His story is now in you. Because here's the thing. Studies show the human brain cannot unsee a remembered face, especially one associated with fear. The neural pathways remain lit, flickering long after sleep. Some claim that by repeating his name or imagining his face, you're offering him anchor points, places to re-enter the waking world. And that mirror you passed this morning, did you check it twice? Because Elias doesn't arrive with fanfare. There's no scream, no warning, just the sense that your reflection hesitated for a fraction of a second before following your movement. And if that happened to you, you've already been seen. In 1874, a year after Elias Wrenmore's final disappearance from Briarton Asylum, a small rural chapel in the outskirts of Maine reported a strange incident. The priest, Father Ambrose Cleary, claimed that during a late-night mass, every candle in the church extinguished at once, not from wind, not from moisture, but as if pulled inward. When he looked up, he saw a boy seated in the back pew. Pale, expressionless, eyes black from corner to corner. Father Cleary spoke one word, "Son," and the boy tilted his head, not as acknowledgement, but as correction, a subtle, silent rejection of identity. The priest stepped forward, and the boy vanished. No door creaked, no breeze passed, but on the wooden bench, etched into the grain, were 6 letters. Elias. Father Cleary quit the priesthood 2 weeks later, moved into a remote cabin, and never again set foot in a church. In his final letter before disappearing himself, he wrote, "The boy is not evil. He is older than evil. He is a reminder." This language echoed similar warnings found in forgotten Celtic manuscripts, where a faceless boy, born of silver and echo, was said to appear before great cultural forgetting. In other words, Elias is not a person, not even a ghost. He's an omen, a signal that a society has reached the brink of losing something vital, its soul, its memory, its truth. And when that forgetting begins, he appears, always in places where authority failed, where silence reigned, where systems collapsed. Hospitals, convents, orphanages, towns that quietly erased what they couldn't explain. Just like Wrenmore. But what if Elias never left? What if he's been waiting, not in a place, but in a moment? This moment. Because now, through this screen, his image and name have once again reached consciousness. Your consciousness. And so I ask you, not to fear, but to remember. Halfway through this story, I want you to prove you're still listening. Comment below. I remember the mirror. I remember the mirror. Let those who scroll see it. Because silence is how he grows. But memory is how we resist. In 1962, during an archaeological excavation near the ruins of a burned-down chapel in Vermont, a research team uncovered something peculiar. Beneath layers of ash and melted glass, they found an iron-bound journal belonging to a nun named Sister Elira. The final entry was dated precisely March 17, 1874, the very day Elias Wrenmore vanished from public record. Her handwriting was frantic, scattered, but one line repeated over and over. He walked backward into the chapel. She described the boy as pale, barefoot, and completely silent. He entered not through the doors, but through a mirror stored in the vestry, one used only for anointing rituals. The mirror didn't break. It simply turned dark, and when he stepped through, he walked backwards, as if reversing time. No one else saw it. No one else wanted to. She tried to warn the others, but within hours, the chapel caught fire. Not from outside, but from the inside of the baptismal font, boiling upward. All who remained in the building were never seen again. Sister Elira survived only because she'd locked herself inside the bell tower, scribbling what would become the final testimony. She ended her journal with these words: "He is not lost. He is not found. He is the space between what we forget and what we fear to remember." Decades later, her journal was locked away, not by historians or clergy, but by a private holding company known only by initials, RHC. That same company quietly purchased what remained of Briarton Asylum's land in the 1990s. They sealed it off. No public access. No redevelopment. Locals say the soil won't hold foundation. That every attempt to build something there fails. Concrete cracks, electrical systems burn out, and workers refuse to return. One man claimed he saw a child's footprints in the mud, leading into a wall of mirrors left behind by a performance art installation. The exhibit was called Perception Delay, and those who walked it reported the same thing, that they didn't remember entering, only leaving. But when they checked the photographs, there he was, in the background, barefoot, pale, watching, and he wasn't in any of the photos before that day. In 1986, a retired nurse named Clara Emsley submitted a sealed testimony to the Massachusetts Historical Anomalies Registry. It was never meant for public release. But in 2011, a whistleblower leaked it anonymously. The contents? Clara had worked the night shift at Briarton Asylum during the winter of 1873. She was 24, newly trained, and desperate for work. That desperation led her to Wrenmore. She described the asylum not as a hospital, but as something closer to a containment site. Not for illness, but for interruption. According to Clara, there was no patient record for Elias. No surname. No diagnosis. His room was isolated from the main building. No windows. One mirror. No visitors permitted. Staff were instructed to slide meals through a slot and avoid eye contact at all costs. But Clara was curious. One night, after hearing a soft tapping echo through the halls, rhythmic like counting, She broke protocol and approached Elias's door. The mirror inside was glowing faintly, though no light source was present. And the boy? He was sitting on the floor, tracing something into the dust. Claire knocked. He looked up, and in that single moment, she said it felt like her own face shifted. She saw herself older, bitter, grieving a life she hadn't yet lived. And then Elias blinked, and the vision snapped. She fled. But over the following weeks, Clara began losing time. She'd wake up standing in the hallway, her notebook filled with sketches of children she didn't recognize. Her reflection began moving out of sync. She quit, moved states, changed her name. But the dreams didn't stop. In her testimony, she wrote, "He was never a boy. He was a mirror of consequences. A face shaped by all we refuse to confront. Not supernatural, not divine, something older, something reactive." Clara died in 1992, shortly after her sealed letter was received. Cause of death: cardiac failure. But her daughter claimed she died staring into a mirror, not screaming, not weeping, smiling, as if she'd finally recognized what she had become. In 2003, a documentary filmmaker named Jonathan Vell returned to the ruins of Briarton Asylum, hoping to create a short horror piece for an indie festival. He brought drones, cameras, thermal sensors, all the modern tools to amplify atmosphere. But what he captured was not special effects. It was something far more disturbing. Inside the scorched husk of what used to be the Eastern Infirmary, Jonathan found a rusted surgical tray. And beside it, perfectly preserved, untouched by mold, weather, or time, lay a child's silver hand mirror. Its surface was clean, polished, impossibly so. Jonathan, intrigued, filmed his own reflection. And in that reflection, for less than half a second face flickered behind his shoulder. A boy, still, barefoot, face calm, but eyes completely black. The footage, he later claimed, could not be deleted. Every time he wiped it, it reappeared on his hard drive, file corrupted, but title intact. "I remember you." Jonathan abandoned the project, but in his private audio notes, which were leaked after his disappearance in 2006, he recounted a growing paranoia. "It's not that I keep seeing the boy. It's that the boy keeps seeing me." He described glints of light, moving independently inside dark rooms. The sound of breathing behind mirrors. A persistent, childlike hum playing under frequencies he couldn't isolate. His final entry ended with one sentence: "The mirror is not a reflection, it's a receiver." Days later, Jonathan vanished. His car was found outside an abandoned chapel just 10 miles from where Briarton once stood. Inside the glove box, investigators found a single Polaroid. Jonathan, smiling, and standing beside him was the boy. Only problem? No one else had been on the trip. No friend, no assistant, no actor. And Jonathan never used analog cameras. To this day, that Polaroid has not aged. Not even the edges have curled. Experts say it's chemically impossible. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the boy isn't haunting a place, but echoing through technology, through attention, through the act of remembering. And now you remember him, too. In 1873, just 2 months before Elias Wrenmore's name vanished from all records, a secret symposium was held deep beneath the Wexley University of Natural Sciences. It was not listed in the academic calendar. No students were present. Only 5 men attended, each from different fields: mathematics, anatomy, theology, optics, and one labeled only as temporal phenomena. What united them? They were all summoned by a letter bearing a wax seal, a sigil historians cannot trace, resembling a split eye enclosed in a triangle, surrounded by the Latin phrase, speculum qui citatis, the mirror of blindness. That night, they were shown something by Professor Merrick Halstow, a man who would later resign and burn every paper he had ever published. Halstow unveiled a crude series of stereoscopic photographs, black and white, poorly lit. They appeared to be images of a child locked in a featureless room. But when viewed through the double lens, the child moved. Subtly, independently, in real time. He would shift, breathe, blink. But most disturbing, he would look directly at the viewer, as if the photograph were merely a door. One by one, The men grew uneasy. One fainted. Another began murmuring in Latin. Halstow explained that the boy had been discovered not in a village, not in an asylum, but in a collapsed observatory once used for star-mapping planetary alignments. The boy was not born. He was seen. Seen during a mirror-based lens calibration experiment involving rotating prisms and quartz slabs. The child appeared at the exact moment two mirrors were turned inward, reflecting one another endlessly. A feedback loop of reflection. And in that moment he stepped forward. Alive. Quiet. Already watching. There was no birth record. No explanation. Just the presence of a boy who should not have been there. The photographs were sealed and hidden. All attendees sworn to silence. But one man, the optician Thomas Ravel, wrote a final note before vanishing. He came from a space between light and memory, not to harm, but to show us what we refused to see, our own interruption. When his home was searched, the only thing found in his mirror was a single word, written in fog, though no moisture was present. Again, by now, the question isn't just who Elias Wrenmore was. It's what he revealed about us, about memory, about reflection, about the thin, silent veil that exists between thought and consequence. In 1873, 2 months after the Wexley Symposium, Briarton Asylum burned to the ground. The fire, ruled accidental, was said to have started in the eastern wing, the same isolated section where Elias was kept. But one document, misfiled and rediscovered in 1979, contradicts the official timeline. It was a letter, unsigned, no address, no date. Inside it reads, "We did not burn it to destroy him. We burned it to trap him, because he is not a boy. He is a symptom, the shape of our reflection, taken too far." Local legend holds that the flames did not burn hot. The fire moved slowly, soundlessly, with blue smoke that refused to rise. When the structure collapsed, no bodies were found. Only ash, and a single unbroken mirror. That mirror, according to rumor, now rests in the private vault of a European collector, a man whose estate is lined floor to ceiling with mirror glass. He hasn't been seen in years, but every month, a package leaves his home. The label? A different name, a different city, but the return address is always the same. Wrenmore. Historians dismiss this as urban myth. Yet modern scientists who've studied the original Elias reports, what little remains, say his physical presence defied the most basic biological logic. His reflection, it seemed, held slightly more detail than his body. Under gaslight, his eyes would flicker faster than his blinks. His breath would fog a window seconds before he exhaled. It was as though his mirror image was living slightly ahead of him, a fraction of a second forward. A future self trapped behind glass. And when questioned, Elias would only repeat the same 6 words. "I only show what you bury." What exactly did he mean? Was he a time anomaly? A mirrored echo from some other realm? Or was he the physical incarnation of all humanity refuses to face? Whatever the answer, one thing is clear. The moment he arrived, reality bent. And when he vanished, it never quite healed. In the late 1990s, a Cold War-era psychological warfare program known as Project Dimming declassified several case files unrelated to warfare, or so it seemed. One file stood out, labeled WD, Elias, 73. It included fragmented transcripts, mirrored texts, and a cassette tape with no audio. The folder had no origin date, but the internal metadata placed its creation in March 1873. Over a century before such formats even existed. The project analyst who filed the folder under anomalous perception vectors left a single-line note. He is not dead. He is dormant, awaiting recognition. When cross-referenced with recovered Wrenmore material, several elements matched. Drawings, linguistic patterns, and even the repeated geometry of Elias's spiral cage. A motif sketched by the boy across walls. Paper. Even his own skin. But most alarming was a memo attached to the file, warning. Subjects exposed to visual patterns resembling the Wrenmore spiral experienced perceptual feedback failure. Symptoms include delayed reactions, phantom reflections, and mirror-based dissociation. One subject became convinced that his reflection was conscious and trying to replace him. In 2003, a young professor at a university in Prague attempted to reconstruct the spiral using digital animation. He never finished it. On the day he uploaded the sequence, he went missing. What he left behind was chilling. His browser history showed over 200 searches in 12 hours, all variations of the same phrase. How do I tell if I'm the reflection? His apartment had no mirrors. They had all been shattered, and written on the wall, with the edge of a broken one, was a message. The real one is through the glass. I'm just the echo. Elias Wrenmore, it seems, isn't just a child from history. He may be something recursive, a virus of perception, an imprint waiting to be unlocked by attention, by belief, by thought. Once you learn his name, once you accept the story, the seed is planted. The mirrors become doors. The reflections start to move on their own. And worst of all, you begin to sense that you're not the original, just an afterimage. A consequence that a study conducted in 2017 by a fringe neuroscience group known as the Thanatos Collective sought to explore a controversial question. Can a human mirror reflect more than light? Their experiment was simple but chilling. Volunteers were placed in silent, low-light rooms, seated in front of antique mirrors rumored to originate from Brighton's demolition sale in 1874. Each subject was instructed to stare into their own eyes for exactly 11 minutes, without blinking or looking away. They called it the Wrenmore gaze. Out of 23 participants, 19 reported visual distortions. But not just hallucinations. They described seeing themselves blink twice when they had only blinked once. Some saw lips moving when they themselves were silent. One subject described his reflection turning its head, but he hadn't moved. The mirror, he claimed, was showing something else pretending to be me, and doing a better job at it. Another reported whispering coming from behind the glass, though there were no speakers, no recording devices, no power source. Just polished obsidian framed in rusted iron. Most disturbing was the youngest participant, 11 years old. After the session, she refused to speak. Instead, she began writing Elias Wrenmore's name over and over again, backwards. When asked what happened, she simply said, "He remembered me first." Within 2 days, the study was terminated. The mirrors were sealed, and the research group disbanded under government order, citing public psychological contamination concerns. But the files leaked, and buried in them was a hand-drawn diagram of the so-called perceptual feedback loop, a spiral within a spiral with an eye at the center. It wasn't signed, but across the bottom, in faint graphite, someone had scrawled, "The boy isn't gone. He's watching from behind the silver." Whether you believe the mirror is a spiritual portal, a psychological construct, or just polished glass, the truth is, you've already looked. And now that the name Elias Wrenmore is in your mind, now that you've pictured his face, the loop has begun again. A story forgotten, until you remembered. There's an ancient belief, older than religion, older than language, that a name, once spoken, gives power to the thing named. And Elias Wrenmore is not just a name. It is a pattern, a mirror inside language itself. Folklorists digging into old Briarhelm dialects found an eerie linguistic coincidence. Elias in the old tongue meant to reflect. Wrenmore, translated loosely to the silent watchers. Together, the name forms a phrase. Reflection of the silent watchers. What does that mean? Some believe Elias was never human, that he was the consequence of an ancient ritual, or perhaps the unintended result of humanity's obsession with its own image. In every culture, in every mythos, mirrors appear not just as tools, but as portals, prisons, and proofs of existence. The Wrenmore incident, the collective name for the boy's brief appearance and its aftermath, triggered a kind of quiet war. Not between nations, but between institutions. Churches, scientific bodies, secret societies. Each took a stance on what Elias was. Each tried to contain the concept of him. Some groups erased documents, burned artifacts, even lobbied to remove mirrors from psychiatric wards. Others worshipped the boy, believed he was a message from beyond the veil. a warning about the perils of unchecked perception. In 1922, a Vatican subcommittee quietly labeled Elias Wrenmore as non-canon paranormal, the same category they once used for Fatima apparitions and the possession of Anneliese Michel. In 1931, Soviet experimentalists tried to recreate the Wrenmore pattern using twin orphans, mirrored rooms, and induced sensory starvation. The project was shut down when the twins began speaking in sync, answering questions before they were asked, and describing dreams they had not yet had. And in every case, in every file, every suppressed record, one phrase kept appearing, sometimes scratched in wood, sometimes scrawled in margins. Always the same. He is the reflection of what we hide. If true, then Elias isn't unique. He's the result, the consequence. A mirror formed by guilt, fear, secrets, sharpened into something that could stare back. And now that you've made it this far into the story, you have seen him too. He may not show up in your mirror tonight, but something else will feel different. The way your reflection holds its gaze a second too long. The sound of your breath arriving late. The quiet suspicion that someone or something is watching you from just behind the silver. In 1973, nearly a full century after Elias Wrenmore's final documented sighting, a classified report from the British Psychological Warfare Division resurfaced, buried within a mislabeled ministry archive. It detailed an operation called Project Mirror Seed. The mission? To test whether the concept of Elias Wrenmore, just a story, could be weaponized. They hypothesized that belief in Elias, when introduced into a population through subtle means, could alter cognitive behavior, lower resistance to suggestion, and increase susceptibility to collective hallucinations. A weapon not of bombs or bullets, but of story. Agents were sent to rural villages across Scotland, Ireland, and East Prussia. Each carried a single object, a children's drawing. Always the same. A pale boy with empty eyes, standing in front of a black mirror. They left these drawings in schools, hospitals, churches. Weeks later, communities began reporting strange phenomena. Children waking in the night, screaming Elias's name. Elderly residents forgetting their own reflections. Mirrors fogging without condensation, and sometimes showing images not present in the room. The report claimed this wasn't paranormal. It was cognitive viral exposure. In other words, belief as infection. The more people heard about Elias, the more power the idea gained. A feedback loop of imagination feeding reality, just as the old spiral diagrams predicted. One experiment placed a test group in a room with a two-way mirror and played a whispered audio loop repeating, "You are not alone. He sees you now." Within 6 minutes, half the subjects reported seeing movement in the mirror that didn't correspond to their own. One participant, a soldier named Reeves, became violent, insisting someone had walked out of the mirror and into the room. He screamed that he wasn't real anymore. And in the margin of that page, the agent wrote, "Elias is not a ghost. He is a system error in human thought." This is what makes the story so dangerous. You don't need to believe in Elias Wrenmore for him to affect you. You only need to hear his name, imagine his face stared too long into a mirror, and ask yourself, what if I'm the reflection? If you're still watching, comment below. He was always behind glass. Write it twice and read it aloud. We're not done yet. By the early 1980s, Project Mirror Seed had officially been dismantled, or so they claimed, but fragments of it remained, embedded in academic circles, art collectives, and experimental psychology programs. Elias Wrenmore had gone underground, not as a myth, but as a mechanism. At a small university in Dresden, a cognitive science professor named Dr. Lena Vorius began noticing strange patterns in her students' artwork. Without knowing the story of Elias, they were independently sketching similar imagery. A faceless child, fractured reflections, a black void where a mirror should be. Dr. Vorius conducted interviews. Her students all reported the same dreams. A long hallway, a mirror at the end, a boy waiting behind the glass. They would approach, and he would smile, but their own reflection would not. It wasn't Elias they feared. It was themselves. The experiment escalated when Dr. Vorius introduced the Wrenmore variable, a looped whisper recording with no discernible language, just breath and rhythm. She played it in classrooms, in sleep labs, even in her own home. 3 weeks later, she was found unresponsive, standing in front of her bathroom mirror, catatonic, fingers dug into her own face. The walls around her were covered in writing. Not in ink, in blood. He showed me who I am. The files disappeared the next day. Vorius's department was shut down. Students were relocated, their transcripts sealed. And yet the sketches began appearing online. Forums were flooded with claims of mirrored sleep paralysis. Users reporting a boy who stares from the other side. Video creators attempted to replicate the experiments, and some succeeded too well. One livestreamer's final words before going silent were, "I thought I was watching myself, but I was watching him." And here's the horror no one talks about. Elias Wrenmore doesn't exist as flesh and blood. He exists as a point of awareness. A sentient glitch in the reflective system between your identity and what you fear lies beneath it. When a mind stares into the mirror too long, it splits and something crawls through. Not out, in. You didn't just hear a ghost story. You entered it. And when you look in the mirror tonight, even for a second, you'll wonder, who is really staring back? There's a classified room in the British Museum hidden several floors below public view. It's referred to in internal documents as Vault E7. The E stands for Elias. This room contains only mirrors, 47 of them, all collected from locations tied to the Wrenmore phenomena. Each mirror is tagged, dated, sealed. Some are centuries old, black obsidian plates used in Elizabethan necromancy. Others are modern, household vanities, shards of broken hand mirrors found at institutions, churches, even crime scenes. But the common detail? All of them were removed after unexplainable incidents involving people who claimed to see something behind their reflections. In 2009, a restoration specialist named Malcolm Hartley was tasked with cataloging these items. He was told they were relics of myth. His log entries start off clinical, measured, until entry 14. That one reads, "Mirror from Coldsworth Orphanage. Reflection seems delayed. Blinks occur 2 seconds late. Eyes and glass do not align with subject." By entry 18, he writes, "Refused to look directly. Covered it with cloth. Still hear breath." Entry 20, reflection smiled. "I did not." Final entry, "I think I was cataloged. Not the mirror." After that, nothing. CCTV footage from a vault shows Hartley walk into the room at 8:43 p.m. alone. But at 8:46, a second figure appears behind him. Same height, same clothes, but Hartley never turns around. He just stands there, smiling. Then he walks out. But here's the disturbing part. Security logs show the vault doors never open again. No one entered. No one exited. And yet Hartley's apartment was found empty, stripped bare, as if he'd never existed. The only thing left? A mirror, propped on the floor, still warm to the touch, still fogged in the center, as if someone had just breathed on it from the inside. What if Elias Wrenmore isn't a boy? What if he's a memory shared by mirrors? A program written in reflection, a system of self that, once corrupted, rewrites the observer instead of the image. The boy science couldn't explain because he was never human to begin with. If you're still watching, take a breath. You've seen him, haven't you? Comment it again one last time. He was always behind the glass. In 2014, a private collector named Regina Aldwick hosted an invite-only exhibition in her estate outside Amsterdam. The theme? Reflections Through Time. It was an elite event. Only scholars, occult historians, and eccentric billionaires were allowed past the wrought iron gates. But beneath the surface, something far more sinister was taking shape. Because among her pieces was an artifact she never listed in the official catalog. A compact mirror, silver, unmarked, said to have belonged to Elias Wrenmore's mother. Regina believed the mirror held a kind of memory, not visual but metaphysical, something encoded in the reflective surface itself. Not light, but consciousness. She instructed a small group to perform an ancient ritual, one drawn from medieval grimoires found in the ruins of the Blackwell Asylum. The ritual involved standing before the mirror, reciting a sequence of reversed Latin phrases while blindfolded. At first, nothing happened, but then the air shifted. The footage, leaked by a servant weeks later, shows the participants going still, their blindfolds fluttering as if breathing. Then, twitching, one by one, their heads began to tilt, mirroring each other perfectly. They were no longer individuals. They were reflections, synchronizing, a hive of gestures, a mirrored consciousness unfolding in real time. And then, a final word from one of the guests, barely audible. "He's here." The mirror shattered without impact. Every participant was found with their eyes gouged out, but there was no blood, just an oily black residue left inside the sockets. An alchemical fluid not found in any medical database. Regina vanished. Her estate burned to the ground a month later. Arson was suspected, but the fire had an epicenter, the vault where the mirror had been kept. And on the scorched wall, written in smoke, "I became him." What does this mean for us? It means Elias Wrenmore was never about one boy. He's about identity collapse. He's what happens when the mirror isn't just glass, but a gateway between what you think you are and what's waiting beneath that illusion. Science couldn't explain him, because science refuses to study what undoes the observer. And if this story has stirred something in you, something cold, something watching, just remember, he doesn't knock. He waits behind your smile. In 1923, a psychologist named Dr. Halbridge, working out of a sanatorium in northern Maine, published a suppressed paper titled The Wrenmore Echo. Only 3 copies were ever confirmed. All were confiscated by the American Institute of Psychiatry. What was so dangerous about his work? Halbridge proposed that Elias Wrenmore wasn't just a person or a spirit. He was a cognitive virus, a mimetic entity, a thought form so infectious, it rewired the minds of those who merely heard his name. The doctor had noticed a pattern. Patients who spoke of Elias Wrenmore would begin experiencing temporal distortions. They'd wake up in unfamiliar rooms, hear voices from mirrors. Most chilling, their journal entries would begin to mirror each other, word for word. Men and women from vastly different backgrounds began writing the same sentences at the same time, using handwriting that matched Elias's preserved school books from 1873. Halbridge recorded one patient, a man with no history of psychosis, whispering to himself for hours in the mirror. Upon transcription, it was revealed he was reciting the diary entries of Elias's mother, word for word, in reverse Latin. She had never published them. They were locked in the Wrenmore estate archives, untouched since 1874. But the patient knew them, because Elias was already inside. Halbridge called it mirror seeding, the idea that every human being is a vessel for mirrored identity. That if you expose them to the right symbols, phrases, or reflections, you don't need physical possession. You just need a crack in the ego. And Elias Wrenmore was that crack. When Halbridge himself began hallucinating the boy behind glass, he wrote a final note before setting fire to his entire research wing. He's not waiting to be discovered. He's waiting to be remembered. That line, waiting to be remembered, was later scratched into the underside of a mirror found in a condemned orphanage in Vermont. No one had access to Halbridge's notes. So how did it appear there? How do the same words, "I saw him smile," show up in prisons and abandoned schoolhouses and sealed tombs on opposite ends of the world? Because Elias is no longer local. He's viral. And if you've made it this far, he knows your name. By 2006, Elias Wrenmore had become an underground obsession in fringe occult forums. But what happened that year would change everything. It began with an anonymous user on a now-defunct message board called Mirror Void. The post was simple. "My brother saw Elias in the reflection of a webcam and hasn't spoken since. AMA. At first, no one believed it. Just another hoax. The internet was full of them. But then photos surfaced. Blurred frames of a pale, childlike figure standing behind people in live streams. Always just outside the field of vision. He never moved. He never blinked. But he was always there. The pattern escalated. YouTubers began whispering the same phrase mid-sentence, without realizing it. The mirror doesn't lie. But you do. That phrase was never typed. never read aloud. Yet it infected the audio of dozens of videos. Analysis revealed the spectral voice matched known speaker profile. It simply appeared, encoded into waveforms, bleeding through the background hum of webcams and phones. Then, something more terrifying. A popular paranormal podcast host conducted a live EVP session in front of a mirror, alone. Halfway through, he froze. For 17 seconds, he stared at his own reflection, then smashed the glass with his face. He survived, but when he came to, he had no memory of the event. Only one sentence scribbled into his palm with a mirror shard. I said yes. That phrase appeared again in a live chat during a digital seance hosted from Romania, and again on a fog bathroom mirror in Detroit. Every time it showed up, the subject either disappeared or was institutionalized. The tech world tried to bury it. Streaming services quietly removed hundreds of videos. A Google engineer leaked documents warning that facial recognition AIs were detecting an unknown childlike signature appearing in random reflections, one that didn't match any dataset. Some researchers now believe Elias has become something new. Not just a reflection in the mirror, but a presence within the algorithm. He doesn't need you to search for him anymore. He's already curated into your feed. And now you're watching this. Still here? Comment below with, "He's still watching." Type it once. Then again. Let him see you. In early 2013, a chilling phenomenon swept through a small town in northern Pennsylvania. Residents began reporting what they called the Wrenmore Wake. It began subtly with dreams. Not just nightmares, but shared dreams. Multiple people described the same boy standing at the foot of their bed. Same clothes, same gray eyes, same soft whisper. "You've seen me before." The town's local school had to shut down after 8 students simultaneously collapsed in the hallway, whispering Elias's name in sync. A teacher who tried to intervene reportedly vomited mirror shards, though no physical glass was present. When authorities investigated, they discovered something far more disturbing. All 8 students had, just days earlier, drawn identical sketches in art class. A boy, back turned, standing in front of shattered mirror. On each drawing, in the same handwriting, was one sentence. "I know where your face goes." That line had never been spoken in class. It wasn't in the curriculum. No internet search turned it up. But one of the drawings was carbon dated, and the materials used matched 1873 pigment compositions, no longer manufactured anywhere in the United States. The Wrenmore Wake didn't stop there. Clocks began running backward in homes near the original Wrenmore estate. One family recorded a 4-hour video of their living room overnight. At exactly 3:13 a.m., the frame froze. But the audio continued. Soft footsteps, a breathing sound, and then a child's voice whispered, "You forgot what I am." The next morning, their 5-year-old daughter was found sleeping upright in front of the mirror, smiling, lips moving silently. She didn't blink for 9 hours. Doctors called it an unexplainable dissociative event. But the mother, in a state of terror, tried to smash every mirror in the house. During her arrest, she reportedly screamed, "He doesn't need to enter the room. You bring him through your eyes." That case remains sealed. The mirrors were confiscated by federal agents posing as antique dealers. But one sketchbook, torn from the daughter's lap, was leaked. The last drawing? A mirror, cracked in 7 places. And in the center, Elias Wrenmore, smiling. He had no eyes, just reflections. It was autumn 2023 when the incident at Trinity Haven Correctional Facility erupted into quiet chaos. An inmate named Julian Kerr, no history of mental illness, serving a sentence for white-collar crimes, began carving strange markings into his cell walls using his fingernails. The guards ignored it. They'd seen worse. But then, Kerr stopped responding to his name. When spoken to, he would only whisper one phrase over and over again. I answered him in the mirror. One night, during routine bed checks, a guard spotted Kerr standing motionless at the corner of his cell, facing a piece of polished metal he had somehow stolen from the kitchen. His eyes were wide, his pupils unresponsive. Blood dripped from his ears. Surveillance footage of that moment has never been released. But an internal memo leaked by a former staff member contains a transcript from the psychiatric team's initial interview with Kerr. The notes include this line. He claims he met a child in the reflection who knew his future regrets. When asked what the boy looked like, Kerr began humming. A tune later matched with historical church recordings archived from Elias Wrenmore's parish in 1872. A week later, Kerr died. Not from suicide, not from violence, from neurological compression, the spontaneous shrinking of brain tissue. A condition that, medically, does not occur without blunt force trauma. Yet his skull was intact. His brain had withered itself from within. Now here's where it twists deeper. The coroner who examined Kerr, a man named Dr. Elwood Macy, was found 2 days later in his home, sitting upright in his bathtub. Every mirror in the house had been shattered. On the wall, scrawled in steam, "He is not in the mirror. The mirror is in you." This isn't about a haunted boy anymore. This is about a system of memory control, weaponized nostalgia, manipulated trauma, and the institutional denial of phenomena that defy empirical study. You're not just watching a video. You are participating in a recall sequence. One that started the moment Elias Wrenmore entered your eyes through light, reflection, or word. If you're still here, comment below, "I saw him in the stillness." Say it twice. And if you feel brave, repeat it aloud while looking into a mirror tonight. Now, are you ready to face the final chapter? There is no documented record of Elias Wrenmore's death. Not in the archives of the Briarhelm Parish. Not in the state's burial records. Not in any census, asylum log, or academic journal. His trail vanishes after 1873, just as it began. But in 2025, a private antiquities collector in Cornwall received an anonymous package. Inside was a bound leather journal, weathered and blackened at the edges, with no name on the cover. It contained 34 entries, each written in a child's hand. The final entry, dated November 7th, 1873, reads, "They try to erase me, but I learned how to stay. In minds, in mirrors, in memories." Every entry referenced locations and people later confirmed to be real, including the name Lovelace, mentioned 144 years before Drive Miriam Lovelace published her infamous paper. Laced throughout the entries were drawings of faces, all weeping, all inverted. But one page stood out. It was entirely blank, until viewed under UV light. Then, slowly, the phrase appeared, "You remembered me. That is how I return." Researchers who examined the journal refused to publish. One was quoted privately saying, "This isn't just residual haunting. It's viral cognition. The idea that Elias had become a thought form, something not bound by body or time, but by attention, by belief, by fear. You watching this, reading this, thinking about this. That's what fuels him." In a hidden video posted to the dark web in early 2024, a mass speaker offered this final warning. You cannot destroy what was never alive in the way we understand. Elias Wrenmore was not child. He was a vessel, a breach. And once you speak his name while looking into your own reflection, it is not you looking back. So now we leave you with one question. What if all he ever wanted was for you to carry him forward? Close your eyes tonight. You'll hear a humming. Don't answer it. Don't look in the mirror. And if you must speak, speak nothing at all. This was the story of Elias Wrenmore, the boy science couldn't explain. But maybe science was never meant to. This is DeadScroll. Like, subscribe, and if your reflection ever moves when you don't, run. We'll see you in the next nightmare.